What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining us. This is episode 3 of the Fantasy Football Busters podcast. We are recording this on Wednesday, August 10th. My name's Eric. That's Will, and I'm excited to get into it today, man. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. Honestly, I'm excited to do this again. And also, this is 10 a.m. So, last time we also recorded very early, and that's why a lot of this stuff happened. But we're still hoping to be a very good source of fantasy football news. So, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, be a part of the community. Still getting that Discord up, which should be up and running very soon. So, be on the lookout for that as well. And ready for another great episode.
Heck yeah, man. I'm excited for it. We're going to run through some of the recent news that you were referring to before we get into the divisional stuff. So, as of last episode, or the first episode that we put out, we said that James Washington's injury was a Liz Frank. Wanted to correct that. It's a Jones fracture. And then the rest of the injury news, we got Tim Patrick tearing an ACL, which was a huge bummer, especially right after we talked about that Broncos, team preview. How do you see that affecting the Broncos fantasy options?
It's just gonna give everybody sort of a bump. Honestly, like Alberto's definitely getting a bump off of this, a bump
Yeah,
up off of this. Jerry Judy's definitely gonna get a bump up. Cortland Sutton, he's already the number one, so he was gonna get what he's gonna get anyways. But it's definitely gonna be an upgrade for just about everybody in that offense, just because it should be an elite offense.
totally agree. Yeah, I don't think there needs to be too much more said than that. We'll run through the rest of the injuries. Ryan Jensen likely suffered a significant leg injury. They still haven't specified exactly what that was, but it sounds pretty serious, and he could be out for an extended period. Irv Smith, tight end for the Vikings, had thumb surgery, and they're saying that week 1 might be in question. Another thing to keep in mind. Matt Stafford is still dealing with that elbow soreness that was kind of plaguing him through some of last season. Um, they said that he wouldn't be participating at camp for about a week, but that was as of last Thursday. And I think I've heard news that he is back now, but they're definitely monitoring his situation and trying to take it easy with him. Mike Evans also sustained a minor hamstring injury. Doesn't seem like it's too much to worry about. He always has these
It's
around this
his
time in the offseason.
it's his yearly hamstring injury, man. I ain't even worried about this.
Yeah. So hopefully it doesn't turn into something nagging throughout the season, but nothing to worry about quite yet. Browns wide receiver Jakeem Grant unfortunately tore his Achilles. He will be done for the season. We'll talk a little bit more about that since this is our AFC North breakdown, but unfortunate to see that. Mekhi Becton, tackle for the Jets, suffers an avulsion fracture of his right kneecap. He is pretty much for sure done for the season. Really sad for him considering, he had such high hopes coming out of the draft and he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And lastly, for the injury news, Gus Edwards seems to be doubtful for week 1.
Yeah, Gus Edwards, it's news, but like we've always talked about, it's not really news. It's kind of what we figured
Yeah.
already. Mekhi Becton, it's terrible to see. He's a big guy, so like I don't know what that kind of
Yeah.
recovery time is gonna look like, but he's definitely not gonna be walking around on that leg for a while. I know that much.
Yeah. Unfortunate to see.
Yeah. So I guess with that, we're gonna get into some of the just player and team news, some of the more I guess more not more interesting news. They're all interesting, but there's the more stories that come along with the NFL. The Dolphins lose draft picks for tampering. With that was with Tom Brady as well, correct?
Yeah. Tom Brady and Sean Payton both. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that's gonna crack back down on Tom Brady at all?
I doubt it. I think one, the NFL probably doesn't want to do that to a star player like that, but I think he could weasel his way out of it and say that, it was more so for that front office position as opposed to being a player. So I don't know that that could really affect him too much.
True, that makes sense. And also in Dolphins news, they traded Adam Shaheen, the tight end, for they traded him in a seventh round pick to the Texans for a sixth round pick.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very, very minor news, but
very
yeah.
minor. It's just yeah, stuff moved. That's it.
Yep.
Sean McVay, as he looks at it, says he has two starting running backs, which is kind of what we had talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense because Darrell Henderson, when he was healthy and he was playing, he was very effective last year.
Yeah.
Same with Sony Michel when he actually started those few games. His efficiency tailed off towards the end of the season, but it's sort of just one of those offenses where running backs work.
Yeah.
And when you got two guys who can split first team and try to keep both of them healthy because they both kind of have health issues right now, it just sort of makes sense. And that's kind of what we were talking about before. How do you feel about that? Having offloaded Akers, did you
Yeah.
offload him a little bit?
I did. I did just trade him away in our dynasty league. I was nervous about him, one with just the recovery from the Achilles and whether he was going to get all that burst back. So from that perspective, I'm happy to be hearing this news. I, I still think that both of them can be fantasy relevant, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's tough to say. McVay has typically gone with a bell cow approach and given most of the work to one back at a time. Um, so I'm definitely interested to see if this has legs, if he really is going to make it a running back by committee. I think it would make sense
Yeah.
for all parties here with Akers coming off the injury and Hendo also being kind of not injury prone, but he's a smaller back. And so, yeah,
Yeah, and it very well could also just end up being a situation where he says something like this and then they just end up running with one running back anyways, like you said. So
definitely possible.
it's news, but at the same time, you can never really trust this stuff until you see it. Uh, Other news, Elijah Moore looks firmly established as the number one for the Jets, which we kind of also figured going into this. He's the best talent they've got on the team. You got to give Garrett Wilson some time to actually emerge as a top receiver if he can. Corey Davis was never really going to be the number one, so just kind of makes sense. Marquise Brown arrested for criminal speeding. I've never heard of that crime. I've heard of like
Yeah.
reckless endangerment, but never criminal speeding.
So I actually, not that I'm like an expert on this at all. I happen to be listening to the Fantasy Footballers podcast, and they're all from Arizona. I
Mm-hmm.
think that might be like an Arizona specific law or something like
Ah.
that. The criminal speeding. Again, I don't know too much about it, but I think that's an Arizona thing.
And then either way, it can't be all that impressive because he is already back at camp. He's already back
Yeah,
practicing, so it is what it is.
not too
Uh,
much to worry about there.
yeah. In other news, the NFL is also appealing Deshaun Watson's suspension, and the NFLPA is preparing to countersue. I know we kind of discussed a little bit of the legalities outside of this podcast, but Eric, if you want to update them with what you know about this from your sources or what you look at.
Yeah, definitely not an expert again, but I'm getting this from Twitter and stuff like that when I'm seeing rolling around from people that know a lot more about it than me. Um, so there's already the 6-game suspension that's been handed down. NFL is looking to make this indefinite with a minimum of one full season. And there are people out there that are saying if the NFL were to do that, and then the NFLPA were to countersue, it's possible that Deshaun could just start playing from week one and play all 17 games. From what I've heard from the trusted sources like the lawyer, whatever people that talk about fantasy, it doesn't seem like that's likely going to be the case. I think that 6-game suspension is still going to be the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just 6 versus full season. I would definitely encourage people to look more into that, do their own research there. But that's what I've been hearing. So I can't
Yeah,
really project him for a full slate.
yeah, and I feel like this is just, more examples of the NFL trying to play catch up with some of their precedents that they've set in the past. This is definitely one of the more touchier situations. Pardon the terrible pun I just made, but but it's
Not
something
funny at all. That wasn't funny. Sorry.
it was a little, but just something to keep an eye on. We're gonna get into other news before I get us canceled on episode 3.
Yeah.
We got Javonte Williams. It looks like he's gonna be in a 70-30 split with Melvin Gordon. Is this fake news? I kind of think so because the coaches kind of said that early on when they first re-signed Melvin Gordon again. But what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, so this is a case where we have 2 different Broncos beat reporters, one coming out saying, oh, this is Javonte Williams backfield 70-30 split, and then another one that I typically lean on. His name's Benjamin Albright on Twitter. Go check him out. Another Broncos beat reporter. He was saying at the time that this kind of came out that it was more like a 55-45 split, which is a huge difference.
Mhm.
Um, I'm hearing more and more rumblings. Like I'm starting to get higher on Javonte. It seems like he is taking like the first snap when it comes to all of these different team and individual drills at training camp. So I think that's probably a good sign that he is the clear lead back. I don't know that it's probably not going to be 50-50 again like last season, but I still think it's going to be closer to like 60-40 at best, not 70-30.
And what kind of deal was Melvin Gordon signed to? Because usually one good thing I do is follow the money.
It wasn't a
Because
lot.
yeah, it wasn't a ton. What was it though? I know it was a 1 year, 1 year, 2.5 million,
So
which he's making more than Javante Williams, most likely, right?
yeah, but I mean, when we're talking about rookie deals, like I
Yeah.
don't know. I think you're right to think about it that way, following the money. It's not a huge deal to bring him back on. They also waited until pretty late into the offseason to make that move. He didn't seem to be a priority early. So if you want to look at it that way, that might be a good indication that Javante is going to be, you know, not a bell cow, but get more of the workload.
I think that's a fair take because they did wait as long as they did, but at the same time, he's already familiar with the team. It's not like he really had to be with them the entire off season. But yeah, I don't think this is going to be the case, me personally. I think it's going to be close to that 55-45 or just 50-50 even. A lot of this is, it always ends up coming down to health, really, and who's going to
Yeah,
be the guy week to week. So I still think
right.
it's going to be tough to decide who's going to be who in this offense. Um, in other news, we've got Deontay Johnson's extension. He got a 2 year contract, wanted to sign a shorter deal. That way he'd be a free agent sooner. Hopefully cash in more the next time. Me personally, I thought this deal was very cheap for Deontay Johnson for what he does for that team.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree with you. I was surprised to see this deal at all, honestly. The Steelers have been a team that's relied on replenishing that position through the draft, and they've been very good at it. I kind of thought that they were just going to let him walk, especially with the addition of George Pickens and Calvin Austin in the draft this year. I thought they were going to reload that way, but clearly they believe in him and think that he's important to this team. I wonder if that's more of an indictment on Claypool. I'm just speculating there. Who knows? Um, but yeah, I do think that this was on the cheaper end compared to some of the other wide receiver contracts that we've seen this offseason.
yeah, I definitely thought I had always thought of Deontay Johnson not on the same tier as like a DK Metcalf or Terry McLaurin, but like also very close. And the fact that they're making so much more than him is kind of crazy. Like they're making double what he's making.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you on that for sure.
Yeah. So it's just, I guess we'll see what he's planning in these next 2 years. Hopefully he has a good 2 years and he can cash out then.
Yep.
But I don't know. Romeo Doubs is the star of Packers camp. Is he the next coming of of Devonte Adams?
No,
I don't think so.
absolutely not.
I
This
think
is this is all just camp talk.
I honestly think that this is more of an indictment on like Alan Lazard and stuff like that. It's just more of us knowing that he's not the guy. If Romeo Doubs is coming in and he's taking over the show, and Alan Lazard's been there for what 4 years now. He's going into his
I think
fifth.
so. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Lazard is still going to be the one there. I'm not necessarily worried that Dubs is going to take his starting role. More than anything, I think this is just camp talk. He has looked good, sure, but like I don't see this turning into him being a super relevant fantasy option in this offense.
oh, for sure. I'm not even saying he's gonna be. I'm not saying he's even gonna
Yeah,
be the number one. I'm just saying, where's the Alan Lazard news at? You know,
yeah, fair enough.
and that's just. It's not a great sign, but it's Aaron Rodgers. I'm sure he'll be able to get it done still. The Bears' backfield could be more split under Luke Getsy, Khalil Herbert getting a lot of reps with the first team. Kind of also saw this coming. Khalil Herbert very effective, very efficient last year when he got play.
Yeah,
David Montgomery not very efficient. Um, it's the Bears are they're the Bears, you know.
yeah. Yeah, I kind of expected this, like you said, with the new regime coming in. Khalil Herbert flashed really well in the time that David Montgomery was out. Um, uh, I don't know that this means, like, sure, I'll target Khalil Herbert late in drafts, and if David Montgomery goes down, then that could lead to a really good workload. But I think really they're just going to cannibalize each other in an already really bad offense. So from that perspective, I think it makes it tougher for either of those fantasy options to be useful.
Yeah, it's just going to be like the Bears are going to be what they are in real life and fantasy, and that's not a great situation.
Yeah,
We got Chris Godwin participating at camp, but still very limited. This is on schedule for him. I'm still very impressed that he is actually here and participating. I thought he would
same.
be on for at least the first 3, 4 weeks of the season. He might still be, but the fact that he's out here participating this early in camp is a good look.
Yeah, yeah. We talked about it briefly, I think, in the first episode. I still don't expect him to be full go week one. They're going to ramp him up, but this is a really positive sign. I'm definitely moving him up my ranks. Um, I'm I wouldn't be banking on early season production from him, but like you said, around that like week 4 mark, I think we might be able to see Chris Godwin as usual. So the arrows pointed up for him for sure.
Yeah, I think he'll be back up to full strength some point in the first third of the season. The latter
Yeah,
half of the first third of the season, he'll be back up to full strength, I believe. But of course, he's still coming off an ACL. It's a 2 year injury. But we've seen crazier things happen in the NFL in terms of
for
these
sure.
injuries and people coming back quick. So I guess it all stands to be seen. In other news, we got Roquan Smith request a trade from the Bears, which I would also. Um,
Who
actually,
wouldn't?
a fun fact: Roquan Smith was drafted to the Bears the same year my cousin was signed to the Bears.
Really?
Yeah, so they were supposed to play on opposite sides of the ball. He was having a good camp, having a good preseason, and then they traded for Khalil Mack and they cut him.
Uh, well,
So can't be mad. You know, it is what
Lil
it
Mac
is.
did.
Yeah, that's a guy that, and he said the same thing when I asked him about it. He was like, "Yeah, it's Khalil Mack. I completely
Yeah,
understand that." I said, "I'm no
yeah.
Khalil Mack." So Roquan Smith requesting a trade from the Bears. What kind of a haul do you think they can get for Roquan Smith? Because he's been a very solid player since he's entered the league.
To be honest with you, this isn't my repertoire with the defensive side as far as like trade compensation.
Hmm.
Like you said, he's an all-pro guy, really talented linebacker. Personally, I'm kind of hoping the Commanders take a look at him. We could use some middle linebacker help. Um, but yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what people would be looking to give up for him. Have you seen any news about that?
I haven't. What I usually try to look at, because I think the news just popped up 2 or 3 days ago,
Yeah,
but I try to look at other trades just to see what would it be around. So I looked like the Khalil Mack trade, and that was a second round and a 6th round pick. But Khalil Mack's also older. What didn't really have a great season last year. He was still a great player, but he isn't who
yeah,
he used to be. That might change on the Chargers. I might eat my words on that, but I don't know. Roquan Smith, young talent, middle linebacker, which is a very needed position. He can hold it down. Honestly, I'd say at least the first, maybe some later round picks as well. Maybe a little bit of draft compensation coming out from the Bears too, but it'll be a decent haul. Nothing crazy, but I think
yeah.
this is a it. I always ask that because it's always like, can this trade get done? Do
Sure.
teams have the
Yeah,
kind of capital to do that? And
yeah.
I think Roquan Smith is an attainable player for a lot of teams in the NFL.
I think that's
Just
a fair take. Yeah.
and then we got rookies being listed super low on teams' initial depth charts. Don't buy into that.
No.
Don't do it.
This one I put on here specifically because I know people are taking this way too serious. Traylon Burks running with the twos and threes, and like, who else was it? Tyler Algier was listed as like the eighth running back on the depth chart. None of
Hmm.
that matters. These initial depth chart projections are strictly there to, give respect to the vets. And then as we get deeper into the preseason, that's when we're going to see what these teams actually want to do with their depth charts.
Yeah, because I've seen teams do this and they'll have a completely different depth chart right before the preseason, and then after the preseason, it's completely different. They've changed stuff around. The teams that are high on rookies, they will throw them up there. We'll talk about some of those later. But yeah, it's just don't buy into the hype. Believe it for what it is. And they did use draft capital on these people. So they're going to want to use them. So
Yeah,
just keep an eye on the situation at most, but don't let it scare you away from like some of the top rookies from the draft class. Unless you hear news otherwise that says they have not been good and don't worry about them, they're not playing. Unless
yeah,
you hear those words explicitly, don't buy into the hype.
for sure. Yeah, so I think that wraps up the news segment, and we can get into our divisional breakdown. We start with the AFC North. So the first team up is the Bengals. I'm pretty excited about the Bengals' upcoming season, but I wanted to kind of talk about some of their projections offensively before we get into position by position. So I see this being very similar from like a production standpoint to last year, whereas I think a lot of people are projecting this offense to take like a huge jump. And my reasoning for that is Zach Taylor. Really, I see him as like a similar to early years Sean McVay, where he really lets like the game script decide his play calling. So they're going to be a really good team. They're going to be winning a lot of games. If they're up, I think he's going to continue to run the ball. And so we're not going to see that high pass volume that we really want to see from a fantasy perspective with Joe Burrow and these crazy weapons. The argument can be made that they had a terrible offensive line last year. And so maybe that was part of the reason that they were holding back. They didn't want Joe to drop back and get hurt. So like that's a fair argument. I can definitely buy into that. But also last year's Burrow's passing efficiency was just through the roof. And he's the truth. He's really, really good. So I think he's going to continue to be efficient. But we're talking about completion percentages, yards per attempt, deep ball accuracy that were close to, if not first in the league, like across the board. And so I see those numbers coming down at least a little bit. So even if they do decide to up the pass volume by a little bit, I think with the efficiency coming down, it could mean pretty much similar numbers to last year. What do you think about that?
I think that's something that people need to remember. Not saying you or anything like that, but something that people need to remember is that going into last year, the Bengals were supposed to be the worst team in the NFL, if not like they were supposed to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. So
Yeah,
for them to be as good as they were last year, and expect them to go to the Super Bowl again, you're shooting for the moon. And if you're aiming for that same sort of production and that same exact sort of efficiency, you're shooting for the moon because you're going to get some type of regression. Now, I still think they're going to be a very good team. Like you said, these are all extremely good players, especially in all these skill positions. You've got great people in all of these skill positions. They've added to the line. On paper, they've gotten better. But in terms of just play and efficiency and just how things are going to go, there is going to be some sort of regression. So I am excited for the Bengals, like you said, and I think they're going to be a great team. I'm not telling you not to draft people from the Bengals because they're going to be good. I just don't know if they're going to boom as much as they did last year. They're probably going to be a more consistently good team, is what I
yeah,
guess I'm getting around to saying.
yeah. No, I agree with you. And I don't want people to hear what I'm not saying. Exactly like you said, I'm really high on the Bengals offense this year.
Mm-hmm.
You should definitely draft people from the Bengals offense. They're going to be really good again. I just don't know that they're going to take a massive step from where they were already last year, is really the
Mm-hmm.
point I was trying to make. But yeah, so let's get into it individually. Joe Burrow at quarterback. He's another guy. We've talked about these early round quarterbacks that I just typically am not drafting onto my teams. I think that he can be really consistent for you, but without a huge rushing upside, you know, his ceiling is capped a little bit. Obviously, he's had the big 40-point weeks that we talked about in the playoffs last year and stuff like that, or the fantasy playoffs. Um, but let me pull up his ADP. I believe he's going as the quarterback 5.
He's going as a quarterback 7, I believe. I
Okay,
believe.
I'm looking at it on the Fantasy Pros. He's at like 6.4. So yeah, right in that 6-7 range. You're right.
Okay.
So I don't think that he's necessarily overvalued. I just typically don't draft quarterbacks in that range unless they have the rushing upside, like a Lamar, Kyler, Jalen Hurts type.
Yeah, and when you got someone like Russell Wilson at the 9, you still got
Yeah.
like Dak Prescott even at the 10. It's one of those, if you like the player and he's your guy, go for it. You know what I'm saying? But like you said, I usually like quarterbacks with a little bit of rushing upside. And I don't know, man. I got to see how this line plays because I know on paper they've gotten better, but I want to see how they play together as well. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I see a significant improvement coming with Lyle Collins, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa all being added to this line. But I agree with everything you just said. With Russell Wilson sitting there later, Dak Prescott sitting there later, similar mold of quarterbacks, also in good offenses. I'd rather take the discount, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then we get into the running backs. Really, Joe Mixon is the only fantasy one of note. They also got Samaje Perine and Chris Evans. People are trying to hype up Chris Evans. I still think they're going to roll with Samaje in the third down role, even though I don't know that he's really suited for it. Chris Evans is probably more skilled as a pass catcher, but um, we don't need to spend too much time on those guys. Joe Mixon is kind of a tough one this year. I think with the offensive line additions, it's gonna open up a little bit more of the rushing lanes for him. I could see him close to repeating what he did last year, but he just doesn't get enough passing work to really get up into that upper echelon of running backs.
Yeah, I will say though that going into the end of the season, like going into the playoffs and that last sort of stretch that they did, I think he had an uptick of like maybe 6 targets per game, something like that, which
Really?
yeah, I think let
Okay.
me take a look and see. Yeah, he also flashed upside as a receiver down the playoff stretch for the Bengals, averaging nearly 6 targets per game while running a route on 57% of offensive dropbacks through 6 games.
That's significant.
Yeah, so they might be starting to ramp him up into that because they do know he's capable of it. But he does sort of struggle with health issues throughout the season. Like
Yeah.
it's not something that's going to knock him out for games most of the time, but he is known for like a rolled ankle, them taking it easy, taking him out the fourth quarter, this and that. So it's you want his efficiency is going to come down a little bit, I believe, because he did have a lot of goal line carries last year. But I do
Yeah.
think that his receiving should take an uptick. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying? I don't think they really
Yeah.
want Joe Burrow extending plays as much as he did because he was getting hit as much as he was last year. As a result
Yeah.
of that, Joe Mixon's probably going to get more looks.
I can buy into that a little bit. I'm still hesitant just because we've seen him for what 5 years now, and he's never gotten above 55 targets in a year. That was his second season. He got 55 last year. He had a total of 48. Um, I would love to see that uptick in passing work like you're talking about, and I think that really could kind of slingshot him into that upper tier conversation at running back because I think he does have a really solid floor in such a great offense with a lot of scoring opportunities. I'm not sure that I'm ready to buy in to the narrative that he's going to get more passing work, but I could see that happening. And like you said, if that happened down the stretch run, then that's definitely something to monitor.
Yeah, it's just something to keep an eye on because I don't want to say he's definitely getting more, but it's just something that may happen. I'm not confident like you said, but it is something to keep in mind because I didn't even know that until I looked it up earlier this morning. I was like, oh wow, okay. Because I do know that was a note for Joe Mixon was that he doesn't get a lot of passing work, but he didn't really need it.
Right. And then we can get into the wide receiver room. This is I love buying into the wide receivers here because it's such a tight funnel. Like there's not a lot of ancillary pieces that are going to be getting work here, even really at the tight end position, which we'll get to. But obviously Jamar Chase at the top, T Higgins right behind him, and Tyler Boyd kind of playing that possession receiver role when needed.
Mhm.
Um, Jamar Chase, man, is just such a beast. He's so good, and he didn't get like a crazy high target volume. I'll look it up as we're talking about him, but I think that he could take a bigger jump this year. I think T. Higgins probably stays around the same because people were talking about the splits between these two guys and how similar their numbers were. T. Higgins is also incredibly talented, great receiver. But Jamar Chase is just on another level, man. Like he's already in the conversation for one of the best receivers in the league. I see him taking a step up. What do you think about that?
Oh, 100%. Because he just didn't really get the opportunity at the earlier half of the season. But towards the later half, he did become the guy on that team. So, with a season of him being the guy with his quarterback he's been playing with since college, yeah, the ceiling is the sky at this point. He can do just about anything. He gets rushing touches as well. It's just he's gonna be the guy there, and his ADP kind of shows that as well. He's going way higher than T Higgins, so
Yeah.
T Higgins is gonna be more of a bargain on that side. But you're gonna get similar, probably target numbers from both of them. I'm not gonna say you're gonna get similar numbers because I believe Jamar Chase is gonna take that huge step up. But T Higgins is going to be the more of a discount. But I know you have stuff pulled up for Jamar Chase in specific.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at his last season numbers. He had 128 targets and 81 receptions. And you look at, guys like Justin Jefferson had 167 targets and 108 receptions. So I'm not saying, Justin Jefferson is not necessarily by himself, but Adam Thielen is aging out. KJ
Mm-hmm.
Osborne isn't, a huge threat. So he's clearly the alpha one there. Whereas T. Higgins is kind of also a younger ascending talent. They're going to split more work. I'm not saying Jamar Chase is going to get J Jet's numbers, but I think he's going to get more than he did last year. I think we're going to get closer to that 100 reception mark.
Mm-hmm.
And man, he's going to turn in a monster fantasy season, in my opinion.
He also very well could get J Jet's numbers because he is that good of a talent, honestly.
Yeah, for stealing case, I could see it. Yeah.
It was just interesting, man. When he came into the league, he said, "Yeah, I'm going to break records here." And then he literally did it. So it's
He
just,
wasn't lying.
yeah, he's that guy. So when he says it, I believe it.
Yeah. And then we were just talking about T. Higgins. You were saying he was like a bargain or a discount. I'm not so sure that he is, in my opinion, just based on where he's going. Um, Let me pull up his ADP as well. T. Higgins going, according to Fantasy Pros ADP, as like the 13th receiver off the board, ahead of guys like Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, DJ Moore. Like, I don't think that that's a terrible range for him, but I don't know that he's necessarily a target for me.
At
He's going to
cost,
have
he's not very
those,
great. At cost, not very
yeah,
great.
yeah. He's going to have those boom games, which he showed you last season. He went off in a couple of those games, but the consistency wasn't there. He had a lot of disappearing acts as well. And that's going to happen when you got a guy like Jamar Chase across from you. So, you know, best ball, he's fantastic. He's a good pick across the board, but I don't know that I'm going to be targeting him necessarily at his ADP as a value.
Yeah, he's more of he's solid, but he's not moving the meter. If you draft him, he's pretty much, he's either a little bit above where he should be drafted at, or he's exactly where he should be drafted at. He's not really, I guess that is my bad. He's not really a value. He's more so of just, it's a good floor pick. Very good floor
Yeah.
pick.
Yeah. No, I like that take.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler Boyd, there's going to be a lot of passing volume, so he's going to be involved, but he's not going to be consistent week to week with these two guys ahead of him. I think everybody kind of knows that at this point. That's not breaking news. If you need it's hard to even say consistent with him. I don't know. In a super running back heavy lineup, if you waited on wide receivers, maybe Tyler Boyd is like a stabilizing factor for your team, but I'm not taking a lot of him. I don't know about you.
Yeah, he's somebody I've drafted him before, but I've never felt like safe starting him. Because there are games where he's had opportunities to be the number one. He's just not shown up.
Yeah.
So I think it's the Bengals know he's not the guy. We all should know he's not the guy. He's just someone that you would put into your rotation and maybe a flex or if you really need a wide receiver, because he is in a good offense, there's a chance that
Yeah.
he does really well, but on a week on just a per week on a week to week basis, not a per week basis.
Yeah. And then we get into the tight end room. In my opinion, I don't think that these guys are going to be cracking my fantasy lineups. I know that you were a little bit interested in Hayden Hurst. Do you want to speak on that at all?
It's just something to keep an eye on. I'm not drafting him whatsoever. I wouldn't. I'm
Okay.
not touching him in the draft, but I do
Okay.
kind of want to see how this offense shapes up because if they do go more run heavy, absolutely leave Hayden Hurst alone. But if
Yeah.
they do end up running more on that, pass heavy offense they ran last year, because Zach Taylor, he did used to be a quarterbacks and wide receivers coach, right, for the Rams.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be it could be a passing offense. We don't really know. But if it is on the more run heavy side, I'm leaving Hayden Hurst alone. Joe Burrow, not really known for targeting tight ends, really. He did. CJ Uzama had a couple monster games last year, but that was also because every catch was a touchdown. So
Yeah.
maybe if it's in the red zone, but you're adding up a lot of factors here that don't really equal up to a consistent player. So it's just something to keep an eye on, not something to draft.
Yeah, that was a good note about CJ Uzama too. I was going to bring that up is that he did have a couple big games, but his efficiency last year was just astronomical and
Hmm.
not repeatable. It was really, like you said, that touchdown luck. So I don't see that repeating from this position, regardless of who's there. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that wraps up the Bengals. We can move on to the Cleveland Browns.
Oh boy.
Tough team to project because we don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback, or at least, how long they're going to be the quarterback. We got Deshaun Watson, obviously, dealing with what we talked about at the top of the show with potential 6-game suspension or more. And Jacoby Brissett slated to be the backup or presumptive starter week 1, if that is the case.
Jacoby Brissett is just he's the most unexciting quarterback I think I've ever seen. He's just he's very much a game manager. Deshaun Watson, obviously the electric player he is, but who knows if he's going to touch the field. So me personally, it's going to be tough for me to even talk about any of these players with a Deshaun Watson outlook. So I'm going to talk about them from a Jacoby Brissett outlook mostly. But Jacoby Brissett's not really going to move the meter. He has some talented people around him that can help out, and it's going to be a decent team with Jacoby Brissett at the helm, but it's not going to be a very effective team. Like they'll probably be a good football team, but not a great fantasy team, except for like the likes of the running backs Nick Chubb. He's going to do what he does regardless. But
Yeah, no, I agree with you there for sure. Um, uh, So to talk about the quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, we'll wait and see. I'm not going to get too deep into that. Jacoby Brissett, nobody is drafting him. Obviously, we don't need to worry about that. Um, Running back perspective, Nick Chubb is going to get his regardless of who's at the quarterback position. I think that if Jacoby Brissett plays and it drops his ADP down a little bit, I think he could creep into being a value, just because of how much volume he's going to get, how run heavy they're going to be.
mhm.
Um, I think he's still probably more of a floor play in that position, more of like a consistent week to week guy, just because of the amount of volume that he's going to get. But without the scoring opportunities and an offense led by Jacoby Brissett, I don't know that he's going to have a super high ceiling.
Uh,
Yeah,
I
what's your thoughts?
no, I agree with that. I can't see them being very efficient with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. Nick Chubb, he's proven that it doesn't really matter who's back there. He's going to do what he does because he has been playing with Baker Mayfield for the last few years. So when you kind of look at it from, it's a downgrade from Baker Mayfield to Jacoby Brissett instead of a downgrade from Deshaun Watson to Jacoby Brissett. It's not a huge difference for the running backs group.
Yeah,
But
I like that take.
I also saw that Kareem Hunt, forgot to mention this earlier, he requested a trade.
Yeah,
The team said they weren't going to grant him that either. So I don't know. I think it's more of a move for like him trying to get paid, but I don't know.
I do think that that's something. to monitor very closely. And if you're drafting early, or if you're doing any of those like underdog best ball drafts or stuff like that, where you're not waiting until closer to the season to draft, Kareem Hunt is probably somebody that you should look to pick up, because one, you got the floor of him being in the Browns offense where he's shown to be effective. But if he does get shipped out somewhere, he's probably going to go somewhere where he's the one or closer to the one than, the 1B role he's been playing with Nick Chubb. So if you're looking at early drafts like that, maybe he's a guy to target. He has shown kind of a downward trend in efficiency as his career has gone on from where he was at when he initially came into the league with the Chiefs. I'm kind of fine with where he's going in drafts right now. Again, not a guy that I'm like super heavy or like looking to target necessarily, but an effective passing option that could be like the dump off king with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback.
Very possible. I do have a note on something later for Jacoby Brissett, though.
Okay.
That I just found out this morning as well, doing some research. But I guess with that, Dearness Johnson, he's always solid when he gets the opportunity to play. So with that being said, Kareem Hunt very well could get shipped out. Those two kind of work in a similar role in my mind. They're very similar running backs. So just to kind of add on to what you were saying and the fact that it could very well happen is that they don't really need Kareem Hunt. Like, it's a cool thing to have him, but you don't need him if you don't want to pay him. And he could go somewhere else and play. So Dearness Johnson, he's not somebody that's really getting drafted. I don't really know too much about Jerome Ford, if you want to talk about him some.
Yeah, I just put him on there for like the dynasty community, really. He was a guy that got a good amount of hype coming out of Cincinnati. Rookie late round pick this year. He's not going to make any noise in this offense this year, maybe going forward if guys like Dearness or Kareem Hunt get shipped out. But I don't see him as a 2022, staple of the offense, obviously.
Yeah. It's just something to look forward to in the future because, players do get older. Kareem Hunt's, this is his last year on contract with the team, correct? He's a free agent in 2023. Weird to ask for a trade in your last year.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think it's a money thing. He's just looking for that extension. So we'll see if any other teams are willing to, one, be a trade partner and then give him that extension on top.
Yeah, which we'll see how it shapes out. Now we're on to the wide receiver core, led by Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's been consistently one of my favorite players in the NFL. Not one of my favorite fantasy players though, but definitely one of my favorite players to watch. I think when he is on the field, he's spectacular when he plays, especially when he's on. He's a top 10 receiver in the league, in my opinion. But what do you think?
Yeah, so from a talent perspective, totally agree. He's still got the juice. We're seeing highlight clips roll out of him just, doing his typical route running craziness at Browns camp. He's making people look foolish. But from a consistency perspective, he hasn't really been great in that category these past couple of years. I'm looking at his last season numbers right now. He had 103 targets and 68 receptions for less than 1,000 yards, only 865 yards last year. And that was, as the 1A probably to CeeDee Lamb's 1B in a efficient, high-paced Cowboys offense last year. So that worries me a little bit when he went from a really good offense and only finished as the wide receiver 27 to going to a potentially Jacoby Brissett-led Browns who are going to be less efficient, less high-paced. I'm definitely not in on him at cost right now in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, I'm not touching him either. That's why I said he's one of my favorite players to watch, not to draft. I've never liked him in fantasy because he gets hurt a lot. He has a lot of health issues, but when it comes to, like you said, efficiency and showing up week to week, he hasn't proven to me yet that he can show up every single week and be the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it will definitely be tough to do that with a downgraded quarterback potentially. Getting into the rest of their depth chart, it's kind of muddy. You got Donovan Peoples-Jones, who flashed in a couple games last year. You got the rookie David Bell coming out of Purdue, who
Hmm.
was very productive in college. Didn't test out great from an athletic measurables point of view. Um, if Deshaun Watson gets back on the field in week 6, then I think these guys could have some interesting relevance. Donovan Peoples-Jones is that field stretching guy. He's got a lot of speed. He's got a lot of size. There's a potential for, deep connections and big bombs. Best ball type guy. But with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, I don't really like any of these guys behind Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. He's not somebody. I'm not really touching the Browns wide receiver core right now at all. It might be something to target later in the season, maybe with trades to see what you can do with that. But in terms of drafting them, it's not something I'm personally doing. If you said that you were at cost, I wouldn't be mad, but it's nothing to be excited about.
Yeah, that's true. They are going incredibly late. So dart throws if you're excited about them, but I don't know that I'm necessarily there. And then we can get into the tight ends. David Njoku just got a big deal this offseason. I'm still not sold that he's going to have that tight end one position like locked up to himself. Harrison Bryant got a lot of run last year, even when they still had Austin Hooper on the team. I still see this position being split. Um, Jacoby Brissett does have more of a tendency to target tight ends, so maybe there
Hmm.
could be some relevance there if he is the quarterback. But it's, again, like we've been saying for all of these players, consistency is not the name of the game for these Browns players. You're not going to get that week to week. And so I don't love their value right now.
But I will say though, it is something to keep an eye on because, like you said, Jacoby Brissett, if he does get the nod for the entire season, I think back when the last time he was a starter, and this is the stat that I saw this morning, he targeted tight ends on 29% of passes that he threw.
That's huge.
Yeah. So it's something to at least keep an eye out to see. David Njoku, he's not someone I'm drafting. He's never been somebody I'm drafting. But if Jacoby Brissett gets the nod, maybe a good waiver wire pickup. Unless you have somebody in your league who is psychotic enough to draft a Browns tight end. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's something. 29% target share for a tight end is crazy. If any
It's
one of
super
these
high.
two do get the nod and it's anywhere near that.
Yeah. Yeah. So to wrap up the Browns, I don't think it's much of a surprise, but I think we're avoiding most of the fantasy options here. Nick Chubb, probably a good consistent floor play if that's what you're looking for. But other than that, I'm staying away. We can get into the Ravens now. A little bit more exciting here. We got Lamar Jackson off the bat at quarterback. Again, we've talked about it a ton already in a bunch of these videos. We typically favor the later round quarterbacks, but I think I am quite a bit higher than market when it comes to Lamar Jackson this year. I wouldn't mind drafting him all the way up as like the quarterback 2, 3 range.
Hmm.
Where's he going right now? I'm trying to pull
Currently,
it
he
up.
is the quarterback 4
Quarterback
consensus,
4.
and he is ADP is 50. So he's
Yeah,
about a
so
fourth, fifth round pick.
I, you know, uh, I'm getting super repetitive. Don't typically draft quarterbacks early, but man, I think that might be a good value for him if he slips into the 5th round. Like Patrick Mahomes with no Tyreek Hill, Justin Herbert, if he doesn't, up his rushing volume, I don't see why Lamar can't finish as the quarterback 2 behind Josh Allen this year.
Yeah, or he very well could finish as quarterback 1. He's got
Yeah,
that kind of talent. So it's just,
he's certainly done it before too.
yeah, and this is the example of like somebody that you could reach for and they will move the meter for you. But it's just
Right,
how much do they, you know?
right.
So Lamar Jackson, I've actually never had him on a fantasy team ever just because I've never been able to get him because other people have always grabbed him earlier. But
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, was that your first year in our league? that we came in and I drafted Lamar Jackson like I think right before you wanted him or something. That was his breakout season, the
Yep,
MVP year.
100%.
Yeah.
Because you drafted Lamar Jackson that year, and I believe Brendan drafted George Kittle.
Yeah.
And those were two people I both had on my list for that year. Both broke out
Right.
that year. So it
Yeah.
hurt. But he's a great player. He's a tremendous athlete. He's just one of those guys. He's one of those guys in the league, honestly.
Yeah.
So if you were to reach for him, I wouldn't be mad at it. It's just, I hope that it was worth it in terms of how you build your team around him. So if you're going to draft a quarterback like that, make sure you're doing mock drafts to make sure you know how you're going to build the rest of your team after you do that, because that is a high pick for a quarterback.
Exactly. No, that's fantastic advice for everybody out there. Same as what we talked about with Travis Kelce going in the first round. That's another thing where you got to worry about roster construction. Things can get ugly fast if you take a quarterback or a tight end that early, but if you're prepared for it, it could pay off.
Mm-hmm.
We can get into this running back group where there have been a lot of question marks so far throughout the offseason about health mostly. J.K. Dobbins recently just got activated off the PUP. He's back and practicing in a limited capacity at Ravens camp. We talked about at the top of the show, Gus Edwards likely doubtful for week 1, so it's going to take him a second to get back. Where are you at with J.K. Dobbins?
They're saying he's going to be ready, or he should be ready by week 1. He's not somebody I'm super excited to start week 1.
Mm-hmm.
Where is he at currently right now in drafts?
I was going to look at the same thing. Um,
He is currently
he's all the way down at running back 26 is what I'm seeing from Fantasy Pros.
okay. Which
Uh,
if you're getting him at that price, at the running back 26, in a situation where he could potentially be not a bell cow, but have a significant role in the offense, especially in terms of the fact that like he is a pass catcher too. Maybe somebody that gets a nod.
yeah, here I'm. What is it divided by 12? So he's going as like the 58th pick off the board according to Fantasy Pros ADP. So that's like late 4th round.
That's a little
If
high.
he, yeah, if
Yeah.
he slips, which I have seen in some mocks. I've seen him slip into like the 5th and 6th. I don't mind pulling the trigger there. I think his upside is definitely worth it at that point, even though his floor could be pretty low if this injury, hampers him into the season. Um, you mentioned pass catching. I still don't think he's going to be very high volume there, just because Lamar Jackson doesn't typically target running backs. He's a
Yeah.
running quarterback. That's kind of the MO with rushing quarterbacks. They're not going to check down. They're going to run.
True.
Um, so if his health is up to par, then I think 5th round price tag on J.K. Dobbins could be like a good lottery ticket. But 4th round, I'm still too worried about it. Him starting real slow and potentially just not looking like himself for the early part of the season.
No, I definitely agree with that. I actually just checked to see his receiving stats. Not great. I think he's got 18 catches for 120 yards, which is something. But like you said, Lamar Jackson is kind of the type where I'm not going to dump the ball off. I'm just going to do it myself.
Yeah. And then Gus Edwards, he's somebody that like initially earlier in the offseason, it seemed like he was a little bit ahead of J.K. Dobbins in his like injury recovery. And he was a guy that I would have been targeting more heavily. But now that we found out that he's actually behind, I'm pretty much off of him entirely. They also brought in Mike Davis. They brought in that guy formerly from the Eagles. I'm forgetting his name right now. Do you
Oh,
remember?
Corey Clement.
Corey Clement. Yeah. So they brought in kind of some scrubby vets at this point just for depth. They showed they like to give those guys opportunity with Devontae,
Oh yeah, we saw a
Braden.
lot of that last year.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if those guys get worked in pretty heavily if health is in question for these guys. Tyler Beatty is another guy I wanted to bring up, an exciting talent, but definitely a smaller back. I don't think that they're going to give him any sort of like big role. Even if the running back health in front of him isn't great, I think Mike Davis would probably get most of the run, but he's an interesting dynasty stash for me.
Oh, for sure. He might be somebody, like you said, to look at 2, 3 years from now. But as of right now, he's not moving the meter. They've got
Yeah,
too many veterans right now to take a look at before they would get down to him.
for sure.
But if the team ends up being the carousel it was last year, he might end up getting some burn. So hopefully
Yeah,
not, though. I'm hoping that everybody stays healthy because I do want to see this Ravens team at full strength.
for sure. Yeah, and another thing that I want to bring up there, if they do get back to full strength, if the running backs come back healthy, I think that their passing volume is going to dip a little bit from where they were last year. The previous 2 seasons prior to 2021, so 2019 and 2020, they were, I believe, over 50% in rushing percentage, which is just
Mm.
like out of this world. They led the league easily. And I think that they could be creeping back closer to that. If Dobbins and Edwards aren't as healthy, then sure, they might still have to rely on the pass more. So it's kind of a wait and see approach there. But that's kind of my transition into this wide receiver group where Rashad Bateman clearly leads the way. It's just a question of whether or not they're going to have high enough passing volume for him to be an elite fantasy option.
Yeah, they're not a super pass heavy team. You know, people always give Lamar Jackson whatever kind of flack they do for being the passer that he is, even though I think he's a very good passer. I don't know where a lot of those narratives come from.
Right.
But like you said, Rashad Bateman, clear number one. A lot of these other guys, like James Proche, Devin Duvernay, I always forget that they're on the team until they end up catching like 1 or 2 passes for like 40 yards. And I'm like, hey, there they are. And
Yeah.
that's just about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of as far as that goes.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, I guess I can't say there's not a lot of depth. There's plenty of bodies behind Rashawn Bateman. It's just whether or not they're talented enough to command, any sort of significant target share. I think James Prochet has probably been camp hype wise the number 2 as far as what I'm hearing. Can't
Hmm.
really say that with any certainty. I know that Devin Duvernay has been here a little bit longer. He's probably gonna be more of a slot guy.
So more of
Uh,
a special teams guy too.
that as well. Yeah, he
Hmm.
returns kicks and punts and stuff like that. So he's definitely going to make the team. He's not like a cut candidate because he is useful in the special teams aspect. And then
Hmm.
they also have Tylan Wallace, who was a guy that a lot of analytics guys liked coming out of college, but he's pretty much been a zero since he's made it to the NFL. Now would be his opportunity if he were going to shine. But these guys are really just like super duper late round flyers for me. Uh, Rashad Bateman, I think, is probably appropriately priced where he's going right now. Um, I don't think that they're going to be super high pass volume, but it's just Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews, so it's going to be a tight funnel, and he's
Hmm.
going to get plenty of work in this offense.
So with Rashad Bateman going as the wide receiver 28, yeah. Plus, I know it's something you don't really look into a whole lot because it's not really your bag with the vacated targets.
Mm-hmm.
But Marquise Brown leaving did leave 23% of a target share left
A lot of
behind.
targets. Yeah,
Yeah. So he could very much get a very big role in fantasy. So it's just one of those. You're hoping for a breakout season here, is what you're hoping for, which I think he
yeah,
can get, and especially at the wide receiver 28, 90th player off the board. I'm more than willing to take that shot. More than
yeah,
willing. It's always every year is looking for that next Cooper Cup, that late round pick that can turn into somebody amazing. And he
yeah,
very well could be that guy.
yeah. I know that this isn't what you're saying, but he's not going to get anywhere close to
Oh, no, no, no,
Cubs
no, no, no,
numbers.
no, no,
But
no,
just
no.
from the breakout perspective,
Yeah.
coming from doing very little in fantasy last year to being the wide receiver 1 and putting up good numbers, I could definitely see that coming into this season. And then probably I would argue the number 1 target in the offense at tight end and Mark Andrews. We talked about him in last video, our tight end rankings video, being in a tier of his own at tight end 2. again, I see a slight dip in passing volume from last year coming into this year. So I don't know that he's going to be targeted quite as heavily as he was last year when he put up just crazy numbers. Um, but I don't think it's going to be too far off. I'm easily taking him at the 2, and I don't mind starting, taking like a late round 2, early round 3 Mark Andrews in fantasy drafts.
100%. If he's anywhere near what he was last year, I'm taking that shot because he was a
Yeah,
monster last year. I was afraid to see him every week.
yeah,
Well, not every week, but the weeks I played him, of course.
right, right. Yeah, so I think he's kind of a no-brainer, pretty similar to last season. So we can move on to our last team in the AFC North. We got the Steelers. Uh, this one is interesting, again, with quarterback question marks. Mitch Trubisky has, been the guy that they've been beating the drum for, saying he's going to be the quarterback 1. But reports have not looked pretty. He hasn't been running the offense efficiently. He's been throwing a lot of picks. Mason Rudolph has gotten a couple chances to get out there with the ones and hasn't looked all that much better. Kenny Pickett somehow, after being drafted where he was, is just buried at the bottom of the depth chart. The outlook at quarterback this season does not look great. What do you think about the Steelers?
Yeah, it's not. If I got to pick between Mitch Trubisky and Mason Rudolph, you're already in a bad spot. Uh, we're definitely on Kenny Pickett watch just because of where has he been? We haven't really heard any news about him in a while. He also wears 2 gloves, and I don't fuck with that. So I don't know, man. It's just it's a weird situation for the Steelers quarterbacks. But in terms of are any of these guys a step up from Big Ben last year?
It's crazy that we have to ask that, right?
Yeah.
Like from how low Ben sank with his noodle arm last year. And that I think for me, the answer is no. I don't think that this is going to be an upgrade.
I don't either. I Yeah, I think Ben, it was he always I'm not going to say he always made good decisions, but he was a veteran, so he usually made the right decision. It was just his arm couldn't get it there.
Yeah.
We got a team full of guys who've got the arm to get it there, but we don't know if they've got any of the decision making to go with it. So Mitch
Yeah.
Trubisky started off in the worst possible position he could coming into the league. Mason Rudolph, he's gotten hit with the helmet, so we don't know how his brain really works too much anymore. And
Well
Kenny
said.
Pickett's a rookie, so
Yeah.
it's not a great situation, quarterbacks wise.
Yeah. So to your point about Ben Roethlisberger, he had the noodle arm. Their depth of target last year was, I think, close to last in the league. Everything was very close to the line of scrimmage. So the one kind of saving grace here with if Mitch gets named the starting quarterback is that they do have the ability to stretch the field more. He
Mm-hmm.
can throw those deep balls and potentially keep more guys out of the box from like stacking against the run or against screen passes and stuff like that. That's really the only positive I can see here. So that can also kind of transition us into Najee Harris, where if that is the case, you got Mitch Trubisky, who's has a little bit of rushing upside if they do a little bit of read option or something like that, and with his stronger arm can force more players out of the box. Maybe that opens things up for him. My overall view is that Najee's going to get a ton of volume, just like he did last year. He's going to be like a safe running back, probably a floor play in the same vein as like a Nick Chubb, but in an inefficient offense that's not going to be in scoring position a lot. I don't think he has a very high ceiling.
So I got 2 notes on Najee Harris just because I had him in a different league last year. He's one of the weirdest players to watch play football.
Okay.
Not in terms of his actual talent, or actually, no, kind of in terms of his actual talent. The Steelers' offensive line wasn't very good last year. They've upgraded a little bit going into this year, so a little bit better on
A little.
paper. But it's essentially him running into a wall over and over again, and you're hoping he can trip and fall for 4 or 5 yards every run.
Yeah.
Because he was that guy who would get like 20 carries, and he very well could finish a game with 20 carries and only like 60 yards.
Yeah. Not efficient and not necessarily his fault, like you said.
Nah, it's just volume is king in this instance. I also didn't realize he was as huge as he is. He's a gigantic person.
Massive dude. Yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of fantasy, if you're looking for volume, you're going to get it with Najee Harris. He
Yes.
received a lot more last year than I thought he was going to, honestly. And that's kind of what saved him last year in terms of his ADP. So he kind of needs to have that same receiving work, in my opinion, to have that same kind of floor that he did last year. You know?
Yeah, and I don't think that he's necessarily going to get that. I could see a bump in rushing attempts, but again, offensive line maybe a little bit improved, but still not very good. So the efficiency isn't going to take that big of a jump in the rushing category. Big Ben couldn't throw far, so it was a ton of checkdowns to Najee Harris. If you get somebody who's like Mitch Trubisky, can run a little bit, can throw it further, probably less checkdowns. I expect him not to have quite as many targets in the receiving game, which definitely worries me for both his floor and his ceiling. That's where you make your money at the running back position, is those valuable pass catching attempts or targets out of the backfield, and I see that regressing for him this year.
I also hate seeing any running back get as many touches as he does because he last year was ridiculous. He would have like 20 rushes a game, he'd have like 10 catches a game. He's just got the ball almost every other play, and it's watching him get hit. It scares me. It scares me. Najee
Yeah,
Harris he worries me as a player. Not as a talent, though, but just
for
in the
sure.
situation that he's in.
Yeah, so to wrap up with him, just to give some kind of actionable fantasy advice, he's currently going, according to Fantasy Pros, as the RB6, eighth overall player off the board in the first round. From what I'm hearing you saying, I think we're probably in agreement that that's too early for him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would even touch him at all in the first. Maybe that's kind of hot takey, but if somehow he were to slip into that second round, early second round, sure, I'd
Yeah,
be fine with that. But
if there was a way I could somehow get him on the turn early second round, I'd go for it. But
okay,
late first, I can't. I can't.
yeah, totally agree. Um, and I don't know that there's really any backup running backs of note to talk about there. Like you have guys like Anthony McFarlane,
One to
and
Matha.
Benny Snell, Drew Dematha, and Maryland. Shout out.
Hell yeah.
But
None of
they're
those
not going to be
guys.
relevant.
Yeah, none of them have proven to me. They've even gotten opportunity to be the number one running backs, and yeah. Well, not the number ones, but to actually start a game and to see how they look in this offense.
Right.
Neither of them impress me whatsoever.
Yeah, typically in an offense like this, you might want to invest in a handcuff to a guy like Najee Harris that's going to get a ton of volume. But I just don't think that we know who that's going to be. I think it's incredibly cloudy behind him. And there's even more backs that I didn't mention that they drafted under the team as rookies that could slot in there. So I'm not too worried about anything behind Najee. So then we can move on to the wide receiver core. We got Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and George Pickens. These are big names. What is your outlook for them coming into the season?
Deontay Johnson's always been a solid player, for sure. In my opinion, he should have went to the Pro Bowl last year instead of Keenan Allen, but that's a discussion for a whole different time. He's a solid player. He's going to get what he gets because he is very good at separating and getting open. Also good at making tough catches.
Yeah.
Chase Claypool, also very talented. But the person on here that I'm the most excited to see is George Pickens. Just because there were very early, I think OTAs reports that Mitch Trubisky and George Pickens were actually they were linking up a lot, making a lot of plays together. George Pickens definitely going to be a deep ball threat in this offense. So if they are pushing the ball down the field, I think him and Claypool are going to get a lot of those nods. But it's the quarterback situation that scares me. But we've had elite wide receivers before under bad quarterbacks that could be sustained by bad quarterbacks. So in terms of Deontay Johnson and where he's going, I'm still okay with any of these Steelers wide receivers at their ADP. Honestly, there's no one I'm really shying away from in terms of where they're getting picked from.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with you there. I think the market has they're agreeing with our sentiment that the
Mm-hmm.
quarterback situation is not great and it's pushing these guys way down in ADP. They're not exciting to me. They're not guys that I'm loving adding to my fantasy team, but I think that they could potentially be values. It's going to be tough for questionable quarterback to sustain all three of them. I think if I were to pick one, it's going to be Deontay. He's just been
Mm-hmm.
that stabilizing force for them since he's gotten to the team. Like you said, George Pickens has been really exciting so far. It's nothing but positive buzz about him so far through camp. Um, from a dynasty perspective, very excited about Pickens. Pretty down on Claypool, just because I think that Pickens kind of fills that same mold that
Mm-hmm.
Claypool, like what he's there for. They're similar types of players. One thing that I have seen is that Claypool could be like that big slot guy, fill like the slot role for this team, which actually could be pretty exciting for him. He's not really a separator, but in the slot, that'll make it a lot easier for him to get open. So
Mm-hmm.
potential for production there. I don't have too much to add. Like you said, they could be values because they're going so late, but just not super exciting.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like, and when I said George Pickens is the most exciting, I just meant like out of the three, those people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Just the
Yeah,
one to
yeah, yeah.
keep an eye out for because he may be able to take that Chase Claypool role.
Yeah, I'm
But
with you there.
it's just though, it's gonna be a weird offense to watch.
Yeah.
And then getting into the tight ends, we Pat Fryermuth, which I think I spoke about in our tight ends episode. Go check that out if you haven't yet. But
Yeah.
quick plug. But I think he's gonna be one of those guys. Honestly, just because not very good quarterback play, and if there's one thing in the NFL, if there's a quarterback is not very good, they kind of do lean on tight ends. They lean on those shorter routes, which is where you're gonna see like if Chase Claypool's in the slot, he's essentially gonna be another tight end on the team.
Yeah.
Or Pat Fryermuth has that opportunity to be another tight end on the team. He doesn't have to compete with Eric Ebron anymore, at least as of right now. With my luck, he'll get signed. He'll re-sign in like 2 hours. But I think Pat Fryermuth has a lot of opportunity here to actually take that next step up, considering he was as effective as he was last year with Big Ben at quarterback.
Yeah, so I think this is one we're typically in agreement on most of these things. I think I'm not so in on Freiermuth as you are, at least for this season. Dynasty wise, yeah, he
Mm-hmm.
he showed a ton in his rookie year. It takes a lot for a rookie tight end to be productive from a fantasy perspective, and so it was really impressive to see him do that. Um, but I don't think that this offense is going to be in a lot of scoring opportunities, and he did a ton of damage as a red zone threat, getting a lot of touchdowns last year. So I see that regressing a little bit, even if he does take a step up, just from a talent and maybe in between the 20s, like production perspective. I don't love him for just like redraft purposes.
Oh yeah, he's somebody that I know. I had him. I think I had him in my top 12, right?
I think he was at the very end for you, yeah.
So he's somebody I feel like would end up getting picked up, but at the end of the day, it's a tight end position, so there's not a whole lot to really choose from.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
But I do think that because he didn't really start to play until after I believe week 7 last year, because Eric Ebron got the nod to start weeks 1 through 6, and then
Okay,
he got
yeah,
hurt, so that was when Pat Fryermuth really got to step in. Plus,
true.
anybody with the nickname Baby Gronk got to put a little bit of laurels into that, you know.
Fair enough, yeah. um, yeah, so that will wrap up the AFC North for us. We can get into the AFC South, which it's not boring. It's definitely interesting to talk about, but I just think that there's a lot of, I don't know, rough potential fantasy situations in this division.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll start with probably, not even probably, I think it's pretty much set that the Colts are the best team in this division. Matt Ryan comes in at quarterback, replacing Carson Wentz. Um, from a fantasy perspective, just like drafting Matt Ryan, I don't think that he's going to really move the needle. Maybe in like a super flex league as a later end quarterback too, he could probably be fairly consistent in that role. But just from a team perspective, I think he's going to elevate this offense by quite a bit from where Carson Wentz was at. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. Matt Ryan's more consistent. He's a better decision maker. He doesn't try to play hero ball like Carson Wentz does. He's not going to go out there and lose you a game at
Yeah.
the end of the day. I remember back when he was on the Falcons, there was somebody who once told me, Matt Ryan, he's an elite quarterback as long as Julio Jones is on the field. So,
Very true.
so I think Michael Pittman, he'll be able to take that step up. It's just going to be a bump up for everybody else, honestly.
Yeah.
So this offense is going to be able to take that step up because they are going to be able to pass the ball, at least consistently. I know
Yeah.
Carson Wentz still put up decent numbers last year, but they weren't numbers that were game changing or numbers that actually made the team better. I think Matt
Right.
Ryan can come in. He's going to probably put up lower numbers, but this team is going to be better in terms of efficiency and effectiveness.
Totally agree with you there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so for Jonathan Taylor, a lot of guys have him as the 101. I'm not necessarily in that camp. I still have CMC at the 101, but Jonathan Taylor right behind him at the 102.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, I think this offense is going to run more efficiently, more smoothly, probably more red zone opportunities, which means that Jonathan Taylor is just going to score even more touchdowns, which is crazy to think about.
Mm-hmm.
He had just an enormous amount of red zone opportunities last year. I unfortunately don't have the numbers pulled up in front of me, but he led the league by such a wide margin in red zone carries. So even if he regresses a little bit in that, just this team improvement, I can't see him dipping too far below where he was at.
Yeah, I mean he's going to be efficient, he's going to be effective. He's the one of one, but that's only because of injury concerns. That's it. Because if you were
Yeah,
looking at it from a point perspective, CMC should be the one of one.
yeah,
So it's
totally
just,
agree.
but Jonathan Taylor's going to do what he has to do. He's going to do what he's always done. That's run the ball. He's going to run the ball well. You got Naheem Hines at the backup at the two, as also as a receiving back. I think he's actually going to take a step up this year from last year, just because I think he did have a lot of bad luck last year. He also got injured, didn't he?
To be honest with you, I don't remember, but I do agree with you in the same sentiment that he is going to take a step up. Carson Wentz was not a check down guy. Carson Wentz did not have a high target share to the running back position. It was a huge change going from Philip Rivers to Carson Wentz in terms of running back targets. Because I believe the year that Philip was the starting quarterback in what, 2019, 2020, 2020.
Yeah, year before Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
Frank
So
Reich's had four quarterbacks.
yeah, but that year, I believe Naheem Hines finished as the overall running back 15,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy to think about because I think he ended up in the 40s last year. But I do see him taking a big jump up. Matt Ryan is definitely going to check down more often than Carson Wentz did, and Naheem Hines is a very talented receiving back.
Yep, 100%. So he's definitely going to end up taking a step up. And then Philip Lindsay, he's taken a pretty big drop off since that spectacular rookie year that he had. Nobody
Yeah,
saw it coming. He did what he did. He's making his money now, but he's not really someone that you're going to draft. He's not. He's someone that you would start if there was nobody else in this depth chart to start.
yeah.
So he just is what he is at that point.
Yeah, the only reason that I think he could potentially have some relevance is if Jonathan Taylor were to go down. I
Hmm.
don't think that they're going to give like the workhorse role to Naheem.
No,
He's
because he's
just
more of a
not.
receiving back.
Exactly, yeah. So I think Philip Lindsay could end up being productive. Obviously, not to the same degree that Taylor is, but they could put him into a similar role. But otherwise, he's not really going to be seeing the field too much. Um, so that can lead us into the wide receiver position, led by Michael Pittman,
Hmm.
who is somebody that I really, really like coming into the season. He's a guy that I'm targeting in drafts. Um, he's a reception perception darling. It's a stat or resource that I've referenced before on this channel. Go check out Reception Perception and Matt Harmon. Does great work talking about success rates versus different coverages and stuff like that. And Michael Pittman graded out as one of the best receivers in the league in almost every category when it comes to separation and route success. So with a more efficient quarterback, more consistently accurate quarterback in Matt Ryan, I think this could be a potential breakout for him.
I 100% agree. He's got the most, I think, out of every wide receiver, besides like, the Jamar Chases of the world, he's probably got the most hype in terms of him being able to take that next step up. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I do know that he actually had a pretty high catch rate compared to the targets and the amount of targets that were actually catchable from last year. I know Carson Wentz had some accuracy issues, but I can't remember what the exact stat was.
Are you talking about just like catch percentage?
No, not even catch percentage, but it was just the amount that he caught that were actually catchable.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
You see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Because Carson Wentz wasn't super accurate, but in terms of
Right.
accuracy, he's taken a huge step up with Matt Ryan, and we've seen Matt Ryan be able to sustain top five or top end fantasy options at wide receiver. He was even on
Yeah.
pace to do it last year with Calvin Ridley until he left. So
Yep.
to say that Michael Pittman doesn't take a huge step up because he actually has a really good quarterback throwing him the ball, and this is with him having a good season last year as well. This isn't even him coming
Right.
off of a bad year. So he does. I think he is going to take that next step up.
Yep. Totally agree. And then behind him, you got guys like Paris Campbell, the rookie Alec Pierce, kind of a journeyman in Ashton Doolin. Paris Campbell hype is always there in training camp, and then he always finds a way to get injured. I don't want to put the bad
Yeah.
onus on him. Hopefully, he stays healthy, and I think he is talented, but I don't know that I can buy in because I just don't know if he's really going to stay on the field. Alec Pierce might be a little bit interesting. He's more of a big body, kind of like down the field and red zone threat.
Mm-hmm.
So he could see some touchdowns in this offense. But I think those could also get vultured by the tight end position because they got some huge, monstrous dudes at tight end and Mo Alley Cox and Jelani Woods. So I think this is going to be a pretty tight funnel. Most of the targets going Michael Pittman's direction, which is why I'm as high as him or as high on him as I am this year. What do you think about the guys behind him? You buying in at all?
I I tried to buy in on Paris Campbell one year and it bit me, and I don't think I'm ever gonna really do it again too much. I could see I see the appeal is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I see the appeal. He's somebody. He's a great talent. It's just he's had some really bad luck, and we're hoping that turns around this year. And if it does, he's going to be a great value.
Yeah.
But in terms of if he's someone I'm targeting, no, none of these guys are anybody I'm targeting.
Yeah. Late round dart throws at best.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned the tight ends. Mo Alley Cox, fun player to watch just because
Mm-hmm.
he's such a huge red zone target. Go up and get it. Basketball player type
Mm-hmm.
plays out there in the red zone. But they brought in a really similar player, I believe from South Carolina, rookie in Jelani Woods, who's also just a huge, hyper athletic dude. I'm worried that these two could kind of eat into each other's target share, making them both kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just some people in the comments, Oklahoma State before transferring to Virginia, Jelani Woods.
Virginia, that's what it
Mm-hmm.
was. Okay, thank you for the correction. Yeah.
No problem, dog. Always, I got you, dog. Always. Yeah, I'm not picking up any Colts tight ends. It's somebody they probably end up being. Mo Alley Cox always ends up being a streamer every year.
Yep.
He's somebody that just you need a tight end, you got a bye week. I can throw Mo Alley Cox. Maybe he'll score, maybe he won't.
Yeah.
It ultimately doesn't matter with the tight end position unless you've got one of those guys who's actually doing something. So, but
Yeah.
Mo Alley Cox is somebody who can go out there and who could do something. But like you said, with Jelani Woods also there, who knows who those nods are even going to go to at this point. So
Right.
I'm not targeting the Colts tight ends. I'm not sure anybody was. I know you weren't either. But
Yeah.
it's just something to keep an eye out for, just to keep a look.
For sure. So then we can move into the Jaguars, coming off of a very rough year. A lot of that can probably be placed on Urban Meyer, who's out the door now, replaced by Doug Peterson.
I'm going to miss him.
Just for
The
all the
antics, man.
news.
The
Yeah.
antics were awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so I don't know that this team is going to take a huge leap, but I mean, they were just so dysfunctional. Like they can't go anywhere but up. Trevor Lawrence, a guy that you have on your dynasty team,
Hmm.
what do you see him doing, or how much do you see him improving coming into this year?
I think with some actual structure and the team being built the way it was in this offseason, because they added a lot of pieces this offseason.
Yeah,
I think this is, I'm not going to say this is the year he takes a step up. I'm going to say this is the year he has to take a step up because he was touted as this once in a generation type of talent. And you kind of expected him, he got better as the season went on. Like he did get a little bit better as the season went on. But you kind of expect a guy who you want to be an elite quarterback to still make plays in spite of his team and in
yeah,
spite of his situation. And
right.
we didn't get that last year. So I guess now we'll get to see if a competent coach is that difference maker for Trevor Lawrence or if it was just a lot of hype.
Yeah, I can see that. With the coaching change, I could definitely see Trevor Lawrence taking a big step up. In a one quarterback league, I'm still not really taking any shots on him. But in Superflex, I could see him being an interesting option. He also didn't run the ball very much last year. When in college, he was actually used quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
like that, and especially in the red zone, got a lot of rushing touchdowns. So if we see an uptick in that category, he could be somewhat fantasy relevant. We can move on to the running backs. This is a guy that I think we're both pretty high on in Travis Etienne. Um, Missed all of last season with Liz Frank injury, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liz
Yep.
Frank, yeah.
Liz Frank.
And so he's coming back. All reports are that he's fully healthy. All of the hype, he's been getting the. Sorry, I'd have to edit that one.
No, you're fine.
all all of the training camp reports about him have been super positive, saying he's the star at Jaguars camp. Um, James Robinson, like we've talked about in previous episodes, is back and practicing. He's still a little bit limited. He hasn't been getting like the full or like all of the reps. They've been kind of ramping him up. But even if James Robinson is back and healthy, I'm still a huge fan of Travis Etienne this year.
100%. Like he's going in that same range as like J.K. Dobbins and stuff like that. And if that's the case, I'm taking Travis Etienne every time.
Easy,
It's
easy.
just, yeah. Especially with James Robinson coming off an Achilles, right? Coming off an Achilles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah, I got him getting the nod heavily. Plus, he's got that
sure.
chemistry already with Trevor Lawrence.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, question marks about whether James Robinson is going to be back to his old self after his Achilles injury. We still haven't really seen it. Cam Akers coming back early, James Robinson on a similar schedule. We'll see if he's still as effective. But even if he's taken up, a decent part of this workload, the backfield touches, Travis Etienne is kind of in that same mold as like an Alvin Kamara type, where he's just going to be hyper efficient, even on like a lower volume of touches. So if he gets 12, 13 rush attempts and then 6 or 7 targets a game, I think that's enough for him to vault himself potentially into a top 12 running back range.
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially Travis Etienne is just a good size for a running back, too. Like
Yeah.
he's the full profile you would really want. 5'10,
Yep.
215. He can catch. It's everything you would really want. So I feel like Travis Etienne's getting the nod. James Robinson definitely taking a back seat, which he
Yep.
kind of, which he was undrafted, right? Undrafted?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, undrafted, coming off an I'm coming ACL, an Achilles. He kind of needs to take that back seat a little bit because they did invest that first round draft capital in the ETN. So yeah, that's my opinion on it at least.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement with you. They also drafted Snoop Connor, a guy that maybe is like a dynasty stash and could potentially end up in a relevant spot if James Robinson's recovery isn't where we thought it was. I could see him being that kind of like early down grinder if they want to use Travis Etienne more as like a weapon and a pass catching back. But I'm not too worried about him. We can move on into the receiver position. They bring in Christian Kirk
The man that
with
ruined the NFL.
the huge contract that just inflated all of the wide receiver contracts from then on. Um, so, good player, a guy that has flashed in Arizona, but never been the one. Now he gets his opportunity. Where are you at with him this year?
I gotta actually let me look to see what his draft price is because I love Christian Kirk as a player. I've always loved
Yeah.
Christian Kirk as a player. I think we've talked about him even back when he was on the Cardinals and he wasn't the number one. We were still like, yeah, he's still a super exciting player.
Mm-hmm.
And at the wide receiver 43, I'm taking that every time, honestly. 80,
Yeah, that's a
ADP,
really good price tag.
104th player off the board. That's a smash. That is an
Yeah.
absolute smash every single
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I think I actually hadn't looked into that enough about how late he was going.
Hmm.
Just from a team perspective, like I don't know that he's going to put up crazy numbers, but as the pretty much clear wide receiver one, as the money would indicate, and with an aging, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, who hasn't proved much so far behind him, I think he's going to have to be that one. Going that late behind guys like Russell Gage, who are we looking at here? Like Brandon Ayuk, who like has been getting some training camp hype, but clear de facto one in his offense. I'm in full agreement. That's a smash at ADP.
And even like Marvin Jones last year, he didn't have a terrible season. He had a decent, decent to okay season on a really bad team. So seeing that this team did kind of take a step up roster wise, at least a little bit, I am excited to see how Christian Kirk's going. And for a 10th round pick, yeah, it's an easy pickup right there for me at least.
Yeah, no, I think that's a smart buy. Marvin Jones is a guy that they've been fairly high on in camp as well. He's more of that kind of like consistent possession receiver type. As he's aged out, he's not quite the downfield threat that he used to be. But
Hmm.
another guy that's like a late round flyer, if the passing volume is there, which it could be in a Doug Peterson offense, they typically go a little bit more pass heavy. He could have some useful fantasy weeks for you. They also bring in Zay Jones. I liked the flashes that he showed for the Raiders at the end of last season. They really wanted to use him in a bigger role than I think most people really realized. But again, it's a pretty crowded wide receiver room. So that's late round flyer. Not sure how relevant he's going to be.
Yeah, and it's pretty much the same with Laviska Shenault for me. I think we've kind of hoped that Laviska Shenault would take a huge step up, and it's never really come. And I don't know if that's because of coaching decisions or if it's just him as a player, but he's somebody that I'm avoiding also.
Yeah. And then we get into tight ends for them. Evan Ingram has been getting quite a bit of hype. I'm not so sure that I'm on his bandwagon. He's kind of proven to me, or he is what he is at this point to me. Like what he's done throughout his career. He had a fantastic breakout season his rookie season, put up really good numbers for a rookie tight end, but since then he's kind of disappeared. Um, there's a potential for target opportunity in this offense, but I don't know that it's really going to be there.
Sorry, that's my dog.
No worries, man.
Yeah, I agree though. Evan Ingram, he's shown us what he could have been at the top, at his ceiling, and we're never really going to get that player again. At least I don't think we are. I don't think he's really going to really have that opportunity again.
Yeah.
Um, and then as for like Dan Arnold, I actually kind of like Dan Arnold a little bit as a prospect, but the fact that Evan Ingram's here and stuff's definitely going to get split up. I'm not really a fan of either of these guys
Yeah.
unless they do define who a clear number one is. I just think they're both going to be splitting and cannibalizing touches.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Um, don't need to spend too much more time there. We can move on to the Texans with Davis Mills leading the way at quarterback. He definitely showed some flashes last year. He looked a lot better than I think people expected him to be. I'm not sold that he's necessarily the future of this team, but they're going to give him the shot this year. Um, Not a ton of weapons around him. I don't think that anybody's really, especially in one quarterback leagues, he's not going to be drafted. But in superflex leagues, do you think he's worth a pickup? I guess all starting quarterbacks probably need to be rostered, but where do
I
you
would
have him?
I actually like Davis Mills in Superflex just because he was as effective as he was last year. Like he was the second best rookie quarterback last year in the league in terms of play, you
Yeah,
know, and definitely first best in terms of neck length. So it's just like it's one of those where I really do I like him as a player because he did well in that Texans offense last year. Like I know we said just now they don't have a lot of weapons, but they didn't have a lot of weapons last year either. It's
it's true.
essentially the same team. You're just swapping out Marlon Mack with David Johnson, who like, and I
Yeah,
was an older David Johnson anyways, who wasn't really doing much.
right.
So I think in Superflex, he's definitely getting a nod. 100% getting a nod.
Okay, that's fair. And then, so you brought up Marlon Mack. He's an addition to this team. He's also coming off of an Achilles injury, but he's 2 years removed. He says that he's back to full strength, but actually, all of the training camp buzz has been from the rookie Damian Pierce.
Mm.
That's what I've been hearing. The Florida running back is looking like he's got the inside track to be the starter. They got Mack there. They got Rex Burkhead still there.
I feel
You
bad
always
for
want,
Marlon Mack.
yeah, no, I agree. You always want to have the starting running back in an offense that's going to be fantasy relevant, but the Texans, they're just not efficient. They're not going to be very good. So if there's any sort of uncertainty as the running back position here, like I don't know that I want to invest.
Yeah, I wouldn't invest any draft capital in any of these guys. I could see Rex Burkhead being somebody that people pick up just because he did become sort of the number one there with the Texans towards the end of the season.
Yeah.
Plus, he does have that receiving upside too. And Davis Mills did like throwing him the ball. So it's, I feel so bad for Marlon Mack, dude. All he wants is to be a starting running back. And it's not happening for him anywhere.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
not even on
unfortunate.
the Texans. Like, that's bad.
Yeah, and the thing is, he showed flashes. Like he's a talented back. He looked good in the opportunity that he had in Indianapolis, but unfortunately for him, I think that Achilles injury probably derailed his career.
Are you investing any draft capital into a Texans running back?
So I think that Damian Pierce is probably worth a late round flyer. If he does separate himself, that could be, important enough. But
Also a good dynasty pickup.
I in Dynasty for sure. I'm a
Hmm.
big fan there. But I'm not expecting too much production wise from this backfield. So that kind of wraps up the running back room. And then you got Brandon Cooks leading the way for their wide receiver group. You also got a somewhat exciting second year guy in Nico Collins, and then not a lot behind the two of them. Brandon Cooks had a pretty decent year last year. I'm a little worried that that was pretty much his ceiling. Um, I was looking at some of the splits with him and Nico Collins. When Nico Collins was off the field, he was getting targeted. Brandon Cooks was getting targeted on 29% of his routes, which is a really high rate. But then when Collins was on the field, that number dropped down to 22%. So with him being more of a consistent factor in this offense, I think that Brandon Cooks could drop down a little bit in terms of fantasy production.
For sure. And in terms of the people that are getting drafted around Brandon Cooks, with the exception of Gabriel Davis, I'm taking just about all of them over Brandon Cooks. Just in like you got Marquise Brown, you got Allen Robinson, you got Jalen Waddle, the pick before him. You got Jerry Judy coming after, which also probably going to take the nod before I would take Brandon Cooks. It's just like you said, I think it is his ceiling. I think that's the best that you could squeeze out of the situation that he's in Houston.
For
Or
sure, I'm with you, and I think that was I think that was well said as far as like the other people going around him in ADP. I'm in lockstep there. Like you got Chris Godwin, Jerry Judy, Cortland Sutton, Michael Thomas, Allen Robinson, all going behind him.
Yeah,
I want all of them over Brandon Cooks this year.
absolutely. I share that same sentiment. And that goes the same with just about all of these receivers for the Texans. The only one me personally, I would invest draft capital in would have been Brandon Cooks. And again, it's just not as safe of a bet as people like to say. I know Brandon Cooks has his whole he gets 1,000 yards or he has a really good season every year, but he's not that same player anymore, and he's not in a good situation, so that you can't bank on that anymore.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely fair. Like I said, there's not too much behind him. Chris Moore, Chris Conley, I don't think that they're really worth mentioning, especially in a lower passing volume offense. We can go to the tight end position. Brevin Jordan is a guy that I like in Dynasty. I think he looked good coming out of Miami as a prospect. And he showed flashes at the end of last season once he came back healthy. I've heard a few training camp reports saying that there's a good rapport between Mills and Jordan so far in camp. I'm not sure, how heavily you want to buy into that. In a regular redraft league, I don't think that he's going to make a bunch of noise, but dynasty-wise, he's somebody that I'm paying attention to.
Yeah, I agree with that. Dynasty is kind of tough to come across good tight ends that are going to be, especially young good tight ends that are going to be good going into the future. Because the Texans are bad right now, but I do see them as a team with potential to get better. You know what I mean? So it's a bad situation for now, but 2, 3 years from now, I could see them elevating themselves, whether that be through draft capital, this and that. But we also still kind of got to see this Deshaun Watson fallout too, because I don't think the league is done with the Texans either. Because
Yeah,
a lot of
no,
that stuff is conflicting reports too.
yeah, no, that's definitely worth mentioning. That's a good point. Um, so I guess we can also bring up Pharaoh Brown, who's behind Brevin Jordan. Probably, we're not even sure what that depth chart is going to shake out to look like yet, but he's not somebody that I'm touching really at all in any format. I think overarching, like overall takeaways from the Texans, you're kind of a fan of Davis Mills when it comes to the Superflex leagues. I think you should pay close attention to this running back depth chart. If Dameon Pierce separates himself, he's definitely worth a pick.
Mm-hmm.
But behind that, I don't know that there's much that I'm taking stock into in the Texans.
Oh yeah, it's a team that just hasn't really been on my board since Deshaun Watson wasn't there. You know.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree. And then we get into our final team of the divisional breakdown. We have the Titans. Um, they just shipped off A.J. Brown, which, in my opinion, is going to change their offense fairly significantly. They drafted Traylon Burks to kind of fill that same role. And I am high on him. I liked him a lot coming out of Arkansas. Similar body type, similar athleticism, but he's going to have his rookie struggles to start.
Mm-hmm.
They also brought in Robert Woods as an addition. So we'll see who gets like the clear wide receiver one role there. But as far as Ryan Tannehill from the quarterback position, I think he's only going to get worse.
I
He
think he's
had a
gonna
rough
get.
season.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'll let you go. No, you go, because I got a hot take.
Okay. So yeah, he had a rough season last season. A lot of people were buying into him because he had a little bit of a rushing upside. He got into the end zone a few times, and he was pretty efficient even on low passing volume. But we saw all of his numbers drop last year, and I think they're going to get worse. But I'm very curious to hear what you got to say about him.
I think that this is just a prediction. It's a bold take, but I think that by week 10, Malik Willis is the starter for the Titans.
Really?
I do.
Okay.
I think Ryan Tannehill is not really going to get it done. Especially, I don't know, man. There's got to be some sort of karma to being asked in an interview if you're going to mentor the next guy behind you, and you say, "Nah, I'm not doing that. That's not my job."
Yeah,
I
I could
feel
see
like,
that coming back to bite him.
yeah, but Ryan Tannehill, he like you said, he's been dropping off. He's definitely been tailoring off. He's always been sort of consistent, like weirdly consistent, especially after he left the Dolphins situation with Gase. But now that he's here, he has kind of fallen into sort of that game manager role,
Yeah,
especially with yeah, him getting older, not being as athletic as he used to be because he was a wide
right.
receiver coming out of college, right?
Yeah, he transitioned, he changed positions.
Yeah. So it's just he's getting older. I think he might end up getting usurped.
Yeah, that's a fair take. It's not something that I had even really considered, but I like it. I like it. I don't. So I don't think that he's even really in consideration for me um, as like a QB2 in a superflex league either. Definitely not in a single quarterback league. So that's just my fantasy take for Tannehill. And then we get to King Henry, man. Coming off of his injury last season after just an unreal start, his first, what did he play? 7 games before the injury or something like that? So,
Was it seven before the? Yeah, I believe so. It was seven monstrous games
his
because
pace was unreal.
he was still the running back one for like 4 weeks after he was hurt.
Yeah,
So
which is just absolutely ridiculous. Um, Considering AJ Brown is gone, I think that their weapons have kind of declined. They're going to have to lean on him heavy again this year. We'll see if he can withstand it. It's hard for me to bet against a guy like that. That's just a freak of nature. Even with the injury that he just sustained, he is getting older. So I can't argue with you if you think that, he's due for another injury again if he gets that crazy workload. But
Mhm. I don't
especially in standard leagues, I'm big in on him again.
I don't think he's due for another injury just because he's 28 years old. In terms of his NFL time in the NFL, he doesn't have a ton of mileage, honestly, because he did get those first 2, 3 years to really sit behind DeMarco Murray and learn.
Right.
But I think we talked about this outside of a podcast as well. But that man, he's been running the ball his whole life. If y'all have never seen his high school stats, look it up. He was getting
Yeah.
like 40 to 45 carries a game, 300
It's
yards plus, 4 touchdowns. He's been
astronomical
ridiculous
numbers.
his whole life.
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't think he's going to get hurt again. It was a foot injury that he got the last time, right?
Yeah.
I don't see that repeating again.
Yeah. And the other thing there too is that he came back for the playoffs.
Right.
You
He
can
wasn't as
argue whether,
effective.
yeah, that's what I was going to say, is you can argue whether he looked the same or not, but he did come back. So I don't worry about that injury. It's up to, it's up to the market to decide whether he's going to get injured again, but I wouldn't worry about that one being recurring. I think that he's just super format dependent. If you're in a standard league, then I still would probably take him at the 103 behind the likes of CMC and Jonathan Taylor.
Hmm.
If you get into half PPR and PPR, I think that's where he starts to drop. But I'm still in on him.
I don't know though, because by comparison, last year he actually got a good amount of receiving work too.
He did take a jump up in that category. That's fair.
He got a good amount. I'm
Yeah.
gonna take a look at it right now. 2021, before he got hurt, in 8 games he had 18 catches, 20 targets for 154 yards, which is more than you'd ever think for Derrick Henry. Actually,
Yeah.
no, yeah, he got as many catches in 8 games as he did in 16 games the year prior.
Yeah. His usage definitely spiked in that category. So that's a good point. I I don't know that that same rate returns, but if it does, then man, he's the smash.
Yeah, if it does, but honestly, if they want to keep him healthy, they'll probably just end up saying, "Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We'll just have him run the ball because we don't need him getting hurt."
Yeah.
But we'll see how it shakes out.
Yep. And then, in the case that he does get injured, you want to be aware of the guys that are behind him. They drafted the running back out of Michigan, Hassan Haskins, who's a similar, just big bruising back. That I think if Henry were to go down, they would probably use him the same way they used like the Deontay Foreman last year, who was
Hmm.
pretty effective. And they also still have Dontrell Hilliard, who was really efficient, but he was more of that like change of pace back,
So you would say that if there were any handcuff for Derrick Henry, it would be Hassan Haskins.
in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a Derrick Henry owner, it's somebody to at least look into.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. Dontrell Hilliard, third down back, like you said, change of pace back. Derrick Henry's he is the example. If it's not Najee Harris, Derrick Henry's the example of volume is king.
Yep.
He's going to get a lot of volume, and hopefully, you just got to hope he doesn't break down again, which I don't think he will.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we get into their wide receiver group. I touched on it a little bit when we were talking about Tannehill with the rookie Traylon Burks. They also bring in Robert Woods, who is coming off of an ACL tear, but reports seem good, saying that he's back to full strength. Maybe he starts a little bit slow, but I'm not as worried about it. They also have Nick Westbrook-Akine. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that wrong, or not pronouncing that right, but they also brought in another rookie in Kyle Phillips. He is like a late round dynasty stash for me because he reminds me a lot of like Hunter Renfrow at his ceiling, maybe like an Adam Humphries type at his floor. But the higher end fantasy options, Traylon Burks, Robert Woods, who would your pick be to be the wide receiver one here to start the season?
To start the season, for sure, Robert Woods, just
Okay.
because he has proven that he can be the guy. But I also, looking at his ADP, also, he's someone else I would take a huge pick on. He's coming off as the 102nd player off the board, right
Yeah.
by Christian Kirk.
Yeah. So I don't have a problem with that. I definitely see what you're getting at, but I think I'm a little bit higher on Traylon Burks. I think he is going to be like the 1A, 1B to start the season, and then he might separate himself. And I just think that he's probably going to be the more efficient receiver and probably have more big play potential than Robert Woods. And also, at least according to Fantasy Pros, I'm not sure if it's going to be the same on all sites, but Traylon Burks is going after Robert Woods. So for me, like that would be
Mm.
my value if he's going after Robert Woods. But I definitely see your point, especially if that's flip flopped on a different site.
I have to say, it's more of a ceiling versus floor play. You know,
Yeah,
Robert Woods, he's definitely got that floor. He's a safer pick, but Traylon Burks does have a lot of potential. He has a ton of potential.
yeah,
So I'm not mad at either of those picks, like you said, especially since Traylon Burks is coming afterwards.
right.
He's one of those people who could probably end up being that like rookie wide receiver that starts to pick up and take over towards the second half of the season, like you said, like Justin Jefferson when he first came into the league, or
Yeah,
Jamar Chase last year.
yeah. Maybe not to the same extent, but yeah, I
No.
envision that same kind of late season, even if it's not breakout, but increase in production. So that's what we're thinking for the wide receiver position. And then tight end, it's a little murky, as it always has been, but they did bring in Austin Hooper over from the Browns. I think he's probably going to get first crack at that tight end one position. Ryan Tannehill has shown a proficiency to target the tight end. It just hasn't been consistent because there's been no clear tight end one in years past. Are you taking any flyers on him late in drafts?
I hate Austin Hooper. So, me personally, no. I guess I could see the appeal, but I've never seen Austin Hooper outside of that season with the Falcons being an actual viable tight end option.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
just I don't know how the situation's going to look for him at all.
he had trouble separating himself when he got to Cleveland because they had a bunch of other mouths to feed with David Njoku
Hmm.
and the rookie Harrison Bryant. Um, I think that Austin Hooper is clearly the most talented of the bunch now that he comes to the Titans, whereas that was a question with the Browns. Somebody that like I'm somewhat interested in if I don't take tight end early and I just punt the position like we've talked about. But my expectations aren't super high. It's just tough to have high expectations for anybody this late at the tight end position.
Yeah, I also will say I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he's a decent blocking tight end as well, right? Like he's a pretty good blocking tight end, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Which, and if history proves correct, he's going to be on the field a lot. If you're a blocking tight end, you're on the field almost every play.
right.
So the opportunity should be there. But it's a run heavy offense. Ryan Tannehill's got some good receiving options. I just don't know how much of that target share is actually going to go towards him because even looking at it right now, I see that no tight end on Tennessee last year saw 45 targets or greater than a 10% target share.
Yeah. So
But
I
that's
see what you're
also
saying.
attributes to what you were saying with they didn't really have anybody that was great.
Right.
So,
So yeah, I think that's probably, people's choice whether they want to buy into the fact that there's not going to be a clear one, or if they believe in Austin Hooper as a talent, then maybe he can soak up a little bit higher of a target share. But either way, this is a guy that you're just looking at late. Any other kind of wrap up notes for the Titans?
no real wrap up notes from me. I think we've said all that can really be said. We know who the guys are on this team. We know Derrick Henry is going to be a top fantasy option. So there's no
Yeah.
debating that. It's just a matter of seeing how the rest of this falls because this really is a new look Titans. You know,
Yeah.
there aren't too many people who were here last year that are still here, especially
Yeah.
in terms of the other skill positions. So just seeing how it shapes out and seeing how Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis deal with it, when
Yeah.
Malik Willis starts.
I'm excited to see if that pans out for you. It's a bold take, but that will wrap up our divisional episode. I'm glad we got through it. We got two more coming up down the line before the start of the season. We
Mhm.
will also be getting out a quarterback rankings video either later this week or early next week, and we should have all of those positional rankings videos also out before the beginning of the season to get you guys ready for your draft. So thanks again for joining us. Um, Please like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Like Will has been saying, we're hoping to get a Discord set up here soon. We're trying to set up a community. So please come engage with us in the comments, in the Discord, whatever you guys like. We appreciate you for being here, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Peace.